what are the rules that telecom should follow to protect their customers from scams and fraud? And what are the rules that social media should follow to protect their customers from scams and fraud? And, and if you don't follow those rules, then you need to be liable for that.
It can't be only banks that are out there protecting their customers from these things.
We have to get these other industrial sectors to really step up and do their fair share.
From the American Bankers Association, this is the ABA Banking Journal podcast and the ABA Fraudcast. And I'm here with two of my ABA colleagues, including the host of the ABA Fraudcast, Paul Benda, right here, as well, and our president and CEO, Rob Nichols. Rob and Paul, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having us, Evan.
Thank you very much.
So I want to take a little time here. You were recently in Vienna at a United Nations summit on fraud and scams. And both of you were there representing the United States, representing the American Bankers Association and the American banking industry. Can you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like? And then I'd love to learn a little bit more about how it fits into ABA's fraud and scam strategy. But Rob, if you could just start off, what was the experience like in Vienna at the summit, and what were you doing there to represent ABA and the industry?
Well, there's actually been a third conference that Paul and I just participated in today. But I'll start with your question on the one in the it was in Vienna, hosted by the United Nations and Interpol. And they brought together global scam and fraud experts from all over the world. I think there was 1,100 or so participants there, so widely attended. And you had public sector folks, private sector folks. And one of the key messages that I heard loud and clear is the need for there to be a whole ecosystem approach, that it can't just be banks protecting their customers and their clients. That's just not going to work. We got to get the other parts of the fraud ecosystem involved, where it's generated and created in the social media platforms, how it's transmitted to the American people through these. We have to get these other industrial sectors to really step up and do their fair share. So that was a broad area of alignment. So that was a highlight for me. We spoke on different panels, as I think I mentioned. And then at our own summit, we had several members of the Senate Banking Committee talking about the brand new Scam Act legislation that was really important. It's gaining a lot of co-sponsors by the day that would really make social media companies accountable for the fraud on their channels and networks. So there was widespread agreement for both parties on that, which I thought was super cool. And then today, the two of us participated in yet a third conference hosted by the Financial Stability Board and our friends at the IIF, where it was a much smaller, more intimate, maybe 80 participants. And again, talked about shared approaches, talked about public and private sector partnerships, and doing that whole ecosystem approach.
Yeah. Paul, what was your take on all of the various engagements you and Rob have been involved in?
Sure. So one of the things, through Rob's leadership, we've really become engaged with the International Banking Federation. So this is the banking associations around the world. So UK Finance, Canadian Bankers, and I lead the
International Banking Federation. Always, to me, I think of the Avengers or something.
It's not quite that cool.
All right.
So, but it is.
Don't burst my bubble.
We don't wear capes.
That's right. But I run the Scams and Fraud Working Group there. And so we had what we're trying to do is bring together these different banking associations and understand how the scams and fraud ecosystem works in different countries. So different countries have different rules. So you can imagine they have different rules around banking, they have different rules around what social media is allowed to do, different rules around telecom. And part of the thing that we had briefed the UN team and the UK Home Office, who was one of the big drivers of this, was that we're trying to establish a global baseline. And so, for example, in Australia, if you want to post a financial services ad on an online platform like Meta, you have to be a financial services company, which seems like a great idea. You should only be posting these if you're legitimate. And so we're gathering through the IB Fed these different types of requirements that each sector has. So telecom, for example, in the UK has an SMS sender registry. So you can't just send out all these spoof messages, you have to register. And so we're gathering these pieces together. And that was one of the things that we were able to present at the UN Global Fraud Summit, is this matrix of different requirements to try and establish, is there a global baseline that everyone should achieve that could make it easier for an online platform to operate across multiple jurisdictions or telecom or others, at the same time protecting consumers from being scammed.
So you talked about Australia's requirements around social platforms, the UK's requirements around SMS verification. What are some of the other best practices from around the world that you would be most excited about bringing to the United States?
Well, I think one of the things we see is liability for bad behavior, quite honestly. So Australia is moving down that path. Banks know if we don't take care of our customers and if their account gets taken over and someone sends money on their behalf, the bank has to make them whole. We're liable for that. We know if we don't do our job, we're liable for that. We want to see that same liability. What are the rules that telecom should follow to protect their customers from scams and fraud? And what are the rules that social media should follow to protect their customers from scams and fraud? And if you don't follow those rules, then you need to be liable for that. And I think that's something that our bankers can get behind. We're already exposed to that. We already see that. And that really will raise the bar for those companies, put some skin in the game, and actually have them implement some procedures that will actually protect them.
It can't be only banks that are out there protecting their customers from these things. I mean, if there are other people in the chain here. And Rob, I know we talked on this podcast and on the Fraudcast a couple months ago about the introduction of the Scam Act. You mentioned there were more and more co-sponsors by the day. Can you talk a little bit more about what the Scam Act does that's going to help um, balance those responsibilities for protecting Americans from these scams?
So it requires, and Paul can clean it up if I butcher a data point here, but it requires the social media companies to put a process in place to really verify the company that's putting an ad to make sure it's legit. And then if they believe it not to be legit, then they have to do an investigation as well and ultimately take it down. And so that's the key part of what the Scam Act does. It does some other things too, but that's kind of the key. That's the key component, because a lot of the social media companies know the ads are fraudulent, but they make so much money from a revenue standpoint, they don't have a lot of incentive to take those down. So this bill essentially, Evan, creates incentives.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So, looking at all of the engagement you've had over the last few weeks, where beyond bringing some of these ideas back to the United States, what's next for how ABA is going to continue working to help banks protect Americans from fraud and scams?
Let me start on that one, and then I'll yield to Paul. At three things. Number one is we're going to continue to work through Paul's leadership on the international front. So to have all the other sovereign jurisdictions to do something akin to what we're doing here. And some, as you noted earlier, are well ahead of us. So despite the fact we're the world's largest economy, we don't have the best scam prevention protocols and procedures in place at this moment. We're going to catch up, though. We're good at that. So that's first thing.
Maybe
is,
even take the lead.
yeah, well, hopefully, yes. So one is continue to harmonize and coordinate with our international partners. Two, we have to push all these federal bills, and there's probably more coming. And I think that's potentially very, very exciting. And then third, what we have not talked about yet is the state angle. So many states, led by Nebraska and our dear friend Richard, are starting to introduce state-facing legislation that does similar things to what we've just been talking about here. And I think these companies, when they see both state activity, federal activity, and international activity, that's going to send a pretty profound message, in my opinion, to these companies. And I think that's going to create some very serious discussions.
Yeah. So in addition to the stuff that Rob mentioned, we know the phones are one of the vectors that they contact our customers. And we've had a very, very aggressive lobbying campaign with the FCC for years now. And we're starting to see some movement on it. We're starting to see them putting rules out against bank impersonation. We're starting to see takedowns of providers. We're starting to see them really engage in this space. And so that's one area that we are going to continue to advocate on. And then in addition to all of that advocacy work that we do, ABA is shifting to provide tools to our bankers to help protect them and their customers from scams and fraud. We have our Treasury Check Pay verification service that's out there. We're looking at ways that we can leverage the fraud contact directory, which is now the international fraud contact directory. We've actually onboarded banks from multiple countries. We rolled that out during the UN Global Fraud Summit, so that if one of a bank customer gets scammed and the money gets sent to, say, the UK, you can actually potentially look up that bank on the UK and request that they hold those funds. And so how do we standardize that process for that funds holds request, not just here in the US, but internationally? And then looking with our government partners, are there ways that we can share information more quickly, say with the FBI? When a customer reports fraud and scams, can we bring that back into our banks to hopefully hold those funds more quickly, share those accounts that are being used so they don't receive additional funds? All this work is underway. So we go all the way from advocacy on the Hill all the way down to boots on the ground with specific capabilities to help protect banks and their customers.
Another thing that's a key component to this whole theme of subjects is the role of AI. So clearly the bad actors are using it in an enhanced, sophisticated criminal way, and that's the bad side of AI. good side is some of our banks are trying to think about how can I use AI to combat fraud and scam. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and ABA has, I know, a lot of resources at aba.com/AI on everything that are all the tools that we are developing, resources that we're developing, and things that folks in our ABA partner network are developing, which is exciting.
Exactly, exactly. Actually, one of the neat things that we're exploring, you can actually build customized agents in Copilot, where you actually put resources you pointed to, and we built our first one on check fraud. We've actually loaded in all the regulations around check fraud, what's required, and now we're putting in staff analyses in there. And so it becomes a bespoke AI model. And we're going to see, can we roll that capability out to our bankers so they can actually just query that and get a real-time answer based upon vetted sources on how to handle different situations.
So dramatically accelerating the ability to make sure you're compliant and the solution works and
Exactly.
fits
And
the
so it's
bill,
from a
right?
trusted source. And then the thing is, we have to figure out how do we make it so a bank can put their own information in there. We don't want that shared. We want to keep it secure. But this would be a great way to leverage AI, and ABA can build this tool for you, and you can use it at your bank and get an answer instantaneously.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Paul, Rob, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing with our listeners and viewers some of the exciting things that we have going on here at ABA in this space. For our listeners and viewers, you can find this and previous episodes of the ABA Banking Journal podcast and the ABA Fraudcast at aba.com/podcast. You can also go to aba.com/fraud to find out a variety of the resources that Paul mentioned on the show. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back with you again very soon.